here's what we're going to see as we look at Psalm 23:5. It's simply this: in the crushing pressure of my overwhelming enemies, God offers inebriating joy. There it is. You can hear the two truths in that sentence, right? And that's what we're going to cover this morning. We're going to talk about first overwhelming enemies, and then we're going to talk about inebriating joy. Truth number one: this side of heaven, church family, God's flock will never be free from enemies. We just won't. For some of us, this time right here, right now, this time of worship is a harbor of hope, a harbor of peace for you. Because tomorrow morning, you're going to have to go back to a toxic work environment. Your enemy might be your former. Everything is a fight. Your enemy might be an abuser, and you're still healing from the trauma that they've caused. Your enemy might be your previous church led by a toxic pastor. Your enemy might be someone who ridicules you for your faith in Christ. Now, my most prevalent enemy lives within me. It's called the flesh. I'm talking about an inner insurgent mindset at work against the will of God. Spiritual warfare is not a figurative term. Paul made it plain. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. And these enemies are no featherweights. And your greatest vulnerability, and my greatest vulnerability, is not our profession of weakness, it's our delusion of strength. Because without God, we don't stand a chance. I don't know about you, but I could sure use some good news right now. Well, let's go there. There's two parts to this verse. See, God's flock is never short of enemies, and God's flock is never short of joy. The verse says, you, that's God. You prepare, that is, he personally arranges the table before my face in the presence of the faces of my enemies. See, the very presence of a banquet signals protection. Because according to the customs of David's culture, the honored guest was safe because the host was obliged to protect the guest at all costs. So sitting down to eat and drink in the middle of dangerous enemies is a marvelous picture of safety and security. In a place as lethal as Normandy Beach, you arrange a table and you anoint my head with oil. Church family, if you're in Christ, your salvation is as secure as a banquet feast on Normandy Beach because God is at the head of the table. Because you arrange the table and because you anoint my head, because you do this, my cup overflows. Some of you learned Psalm 23:5. My cup runneth over. Interesting. The phrase is literally, my cup is saturation. My cup is inebriation. My cup inebriated with what? David is inebriated with the joy of the Lord. And to be inebriated is to be under the influence of that which inebriates you. Which is why Paul says in Ephesians 5:18, do not be drunk with wine, which leads to debauchery. So inebriated with wine, one is under the control of a depressant, cloudy thinking, impaired cognitive function, danger to self and others. Paul says, rather, be filled with the Spirit, under the influence of the Spirit's joy, where life is no depressant, rather a stimulant. One's vision is Not cloudy, but clarified. One's thinking is sharper. You see the world for what it is. You see it for what it is. And as a result, you're not an impairment to others. You're a resource because you are under the influence of Jesus' Spirit. You're equipped to live an elevated way of life. That's the invitation, the cup of saturation. The flock may never be short of enemies, but that's not the whole story. God's flock is never short of provisions. And the point of verse 5 is not that life is just one big happy Christian party. The point is that wherever my enemies are, I'm untouchable. And why? Because God is here.